Hey everyone, we are from Tutorial Group 1. Today we are represent Chapter 7, Government Policies and International Trade. With closing case, America and Kenya negotiate a trade deal. Question 1, we are asked whether government should consider human rights when granting preferential trading rights. In my opinion, yes, government should consider human rights, but these issues has both advantage and disadvantage. First, looking at the arguments in favor. From Chapter 7, this can be explained by the politic arguments for government interventions, where government aim to achieve ethical and social, not just economic benefits. For example, during the apartheid in South Africa, many countries restricted trade to pressure the government to improve human rights. This shows that trade policies can be used as a tool to promote positive change. In addition, giving trade benefits can encourage countries to improve labor conditions and governance. A good example is African Growth and Opportunity Act, where the United States provides trade advantage only to countries that meet certain human rights standards. Furthermore, it helps ensures fair competitions. Countries with poor human rights may have lower production costs, which creates an unfair advantage in international trade. There are also arguments against this approach. First, restricting trade based on human rights may hurt ordinary citizens more than the government. At the same time, consumers in that country may face higher price and fewer choice because imports are limited. For instance, US embargo against Cuba caused economic difficulties for the people. Second, there is a risk of retaliation of trade war. When one country introduces trade restrictions, other countries may respond with similar actions. This creates a cycle of retaliations where both sides keep increasing their barriers. For example, the China-US trade war shows how tariff and restrictions led to mutual retaliations. Both countries imposed taxes on each other's goods, which increase costs for business and consumer and slow down the global trade. Third, this approach can become a form of protectionism. Government may claim they are protecting human rights, but in reality, they may be trying to protect domestic industry from foreign competition. Trade policies is often influenced by special interest groups, such as local business that want less competitions. As a result, policies may benefit producers but harm consumers through higher price and less choice.
Good day everyone. For question 2, I believe government trade policy should focus more on consumer. This is because consumers represent the majority of the population, so policies that benefit them will have a wider impact on society. Free trade helps consumers by providing lower prices, more choices, and better quality products. This can directly improve their standard of living. For example, Malaysia drives Asian free trade agreements so consumers can buy cheaper imported goods from other Asian countries. However, if there's too much protection for producers, prices may increase and competition may decrease, which is not good for consumers in the long run. However, producers are still important because they provide jobs, income, and contribute to economic growth. Without strong producers, the economy cannot develop properly. At the same time, free trade also brings risks. Some local businesses may not be able to compete with stronger foreign firms, and this may lead to job losses, especially in smaller industry. For example, in Malaysia, the government supports SMEs and local industry through financial aid and development programs to help them stay competitive. So in conclusion, consumers should be the main priority, but producers should not be ignored. The best approach is a balanced trade policy.
Alright, now we will discuss about question 3, which is given the argument relate to the new trend theory and strategy trend policy, what kind of the trend policy should business be pressure government to adopt? So, first new trend theory are limited and selecting government intervention. For example, government can increase a subsidy, R&D tax credit, and temporary trend protection measure to help the domestic enterprise gain a first mover advantage in the industry, such as semiconductor field. Secondly is the combination of export promotion and strategy import restriction. For example, business should active strike to open overseas market through the negotiation or countermeasure. And the last one is the investment in innovation and human capital. Business should lobby the government to fund a basic research, workforce training, and also infrastructure development to benefit the entire industry cluster. So let's move to the trend policy should business be pressure government to adopt. First is invest in the workforce training and infrastructure. Because even the best trend policy will fail if the worker lack of advanced skill and also power grid are outdated. Secondly is promote export because it will help the small and medium industry enter the foreign market. Next, another trend policy should the business be pressure government to adopt are exposed or purely free trend and also oppose total protectionism.
Good morning, doctor. My name is Nick. So I'll be presenting the question 4. So a US company manufactures the personal computers in Thailand to benefit from lower labor costs and skilled workers, exporting them globally. So now, the US has imposed a 100% tariff on computers import from Thailand due to the trade disrupts. How should the company respond? And what does this suggest about the impact of target trade barriers? So the first is immediate to firm response. So one important step is to move or spread out the productions. Because 100% tariff basically doubles the price, the company cannot compete in the US market anymore. So shifting productions to countries like Malaysia or Hong Kong allows companies to avoid the tariff and keeps the price competitive. Another option is to adjust the supply chains. Instead of moving everything, the companies can keep producing the parts in Thailand, where costs are still low and only move the final assembly to another country, since the tariff often depends on where the final product is made, and this can help the firms to avoid being taxed. So the next is company can focus on other markets. If selling to the US becomes too expensive, it can increase sales in other countries where they are not tariff. This helps to reduce the losses and maintain the revenue. So the next strategy is strategy insights about trade barriers. So first, this shows why company need to be flexible. So if a company depends too much on one country, it becoming very risky. Certain government policies like tariff can disrupt the whole business. So having operations in different country helps to reduce the risk. Second, tariff can push companies to make less efficient decisions. So basically, firms choose locations based on lower cost of better productivity. But in this case, they move productions just to avoid tariff, not because it's the best options, and this leads to the higher cost and inefficiency overall. So, in conclusions, the company should respond by changing its production strategy, either by relocating or adjusting the supply chain.
Hi everyone, I'm Yankee, and I'm going to summarize for the closing case, which is America and Kenya negotiate a trade deal. So firstly, the US planned a trade deal with Kenya in 2020. In early 2020, the Trump administration signaled his intent to negotiate a free trade deal with Kenya, which embarking on formal negotiation by July of that year. Second, the goal was to encounter China influence in Africa. The US viewed that the deal in geopolitical terms, specifically as a strategy move to counter China's expanding presence and prevent them from moving African nations in the wrong direction. Next, China has invested heavily through the Belt and Road Initiative. China has lent vast sums of money for infrastructure, including a 4 billion railway in Kenya, to position itself as the hub of the global trading economy. Also, Kenya is a fast-growing economy in East Africa. Kenya has emerged as a regional growth story with a real GDP growth rate reaching 4.9% in 2018 and 5.6% in 2019. Also, it has a young and growing population. The nation of 53 million people is considered vibrant and tech-savvy, with over 40% of the population currently under the age of 60. In addition, trade between the US and Kenya is relatively small. and the trade stands at only $1 billion, which places Kenya outside the top 100 of US trading partners and means the deal will have a minimal impact on the overall US economy. Next, Kenya export agriculture and textile products to the US. In 2019, the US was Kenya's third biggest trading partner, primarily importing clothing, fruit, nuts, and coffee. Also, AGOA provides duty-free access but will expire in 2025. The African Growth and Opportunity Act currently allows duty-free market access, but its 2025 expiration is pushing Kenya to seek a more permanent arrangement. Also, they are concerned about unequal bargaining power. Because the US economy is 200 times larger than Kenya's, there's a significant risk that American negotiators will secure a deal that disproportionately favors the US. Lastly, the deal may conflict with Africa Regional Trade Agreement. Observers worry that a separate bilateral deal with the US could undermine the African Continental Free Trade Area, a multilateral agreement among 54 African nations.
Now, I will explain case question 1. First, China invests in Kenya to expand its economic influence, while Africa is a fast-growing market, so this helps China strengthen its global trade networks. At the same time, building infrastructures like ports and railway improve trade routes, making transport faster and cheaper. Next, the goal of Belt and Road Initiative is to build a global trade and investment network. China aims to become the center of global trade, while increasing export and building long-term partnerships with developing countries. Finally, should the US be concerned? The answer is yes. One major concern is the potential loss of global influence, especially in regions like Africa where China is becoming more dominant. In addition, there are political and strategic risks. Countries that receive heavy investment may become more dependent on China, which can strengthen China politics, relationships, and influence. In conclusion, China investments are both economic and strategic, which is why they attract global attentions.
Next, I will discuss about a free trade deal between United States and Kenya. In pure economic terms, consumers in both countries would benefit because they can enjoy lower prices and more product variety due to reduced trade barriers. Export industry would also benefit. Kenya can export more agricultural products and clothing to United States, while United States companies, especially in services and technology, can expand into Kenya's growing market. However, some groups may lose. Less competitive local producers, especially small firms in Kenya, may struggle to compete with large United States companies. Workers in bigger industry may also face job losses. Overall, the net effect is likely positive in the long run. Free trade generally increases efficiency, productions, and economic growth for both countries. However, the benefits may not be equally distributed. Kenya may face more risk because its economy is much smaller compared to the United States. So while the trade deal can create overall economic benefits, some short-term losses may still happen for certain businesses and workers. In conclusion, the impact is positive overall, but proper policies are needed to reduce the negative effects.
Alright, now we will discuss about question 3, which is, would a free trade deal have the geopolitical implication for the United States? What about for Kenya? So geopolitical implication for the United States. First one is counter China influence. The deal will help the US compete with the China Belt and Road Initiative in the Africa. Second is set a regional model, because a successful deal could be the template for the future US trade pact with another African nation. The third one is gain the diplomatic leverage. It is because a closer tie with the Kenya regional hubs, both the US influence on security, global governance, and UN matters. And the last one is diversify a supply chains. It will encourage US firms to invest in the Kenya as an alternative manufacturing base to the China. On the other side, geopolitical implication for Kenya. The first one is balance the great power. because the Kenya can leverage either the US or China competition to secure better deals from the proof. The second one is reduce the dependency on China because less rely on China debt and infrastructure project. The third one is raise a regional friction. A bilateral US deals may undermine the African continent's free trade area and also strain trade with the neighbors. And the last one is proof or raise a legitimate alliance with the US enhance Kenya global standing, but the Loop Cedars deals could be trigger the domestic backlash.
So let's move into the closing case question 4. So I will discuss whether the United States and Kenya should continue pursuing a free trade agreements. This trade deal was initially in 2020 under the Trump administrations, mainly to counter China's growing influence in Africa. Kenya was selected because it's one of the faster growing economy in East Africa and served as a key regional hub. However, when the Biden administration took over in 2021, there was uncertainty about whether the negotiations would happen or continue. So let's looking at the arguments for the US. Continue the deal would help strengthen the influence in Africa and better compete with China's presence. It also allows the US to build a long-term economic partnership in a region with a strong future growth potential. However, the benefits in the short term are relatively limited, and the Biden administration may prefer a multilateral approach instead of bilateral agreement. So for Kenya, continue the deal is important because it can secure the access to the US market, especially with the AGOA expiring in 2025. It can also help to boost the expose and attract the foreign investments. On the other hand, Kenya faced the risks such as unequal bargaining power, which may lead to unfavorable terms and possible conflict with Africa continental free trade area. Overall, both countries have strong reasons to continue the deal, but careful negotiation is essential to ensure that agreement is fair and beneficial for both sides.
A very good day to everyone. I'm Lisa, and now I'd like to continue critical thinking question 5. So for this question, I will distribute into 4 parts. So for the first part, the US ban on Huawei can be evaluated from both political and economic perspectives. From a political standpoint, the policy is justified due to national security reasons. Governments often intervene to protect national interests, especially in strategic industries like telecommunications, which are critical infrastructure. There is also a risk that such technology could be used for military or surveillance purposes. Therefore, restricting Huawei's access to advanced semiconductors helps reduce potential security threats. However, from an economic perspective, the policy is less justified. Free trade generally increases efficiency and global welfare, but trade restrictions distort markets and reduce the benefits of specialization. In addition, the ban disrupts global supply chains and limits firms' ability to trade freely. So overall, it is politically justified, but economically inefficient. Right, so for the next part, this policy may lead to several important long-term implications. First, it can trigger trade retaliation. Other countries, especially China, may impose counter restrictions, which could escalate into trade wars and reduce global trade flows. Second, it may slow down globalization. Instead of reducing trade barriers, such policies encourage economic nationalism and protectionism, leading to less global integration. Third, global supply chains may be disrupted. Firms will need to find alternative suppliers or relocate production, which increases costs and inefficiencies. Finally, the policy reduces gains from trade. It limits specialization and comparative advantage, leading to higher prices, less innovation, and lower overall welfare. Overall, these effects may weaken the global trading system. So, for the third part, the policy creates both winners and losers actually. On the positive side, US national security benefits because the risk from foreign technology threats is reduced. In addition, competing firms, both in the US and other countries, may gain market share with Huawei when Huawei is restricted. Some domestic industries may also benefit if production shifts back to the US. However, there are clear losers. US firms that previously supplied Huawei lose an important customer and significant revenue. Huawei itself is affected because it cannot access critical components like semiconductors. Finally, global consumers and industries may face higher costs, fewer choices, and slower innovation. So overall, while some parties benefit, the total global welfare is likely reduced. Alright, so for the fourth part, the best policy approach is a balanced one, which is supporting free trade while allowing limited intervention. Alright, so first, the US should adopt targeted intervention by focusing on high-risk technologies rather than imposing broad bans. Second, it should avoid escalation by minimizing actions that provoke retaliation and maintaining stable trade relations. Thirdly, the government should strengthen domestic competitiveness by investing in innovation, research and development, and supporting the semiconductor industry. Finally, cooperation with allies is important. Coordinating policies ensure effectiveness and reduce loopholes in global supply chains. Overall, a targeted and cooperative approach would be the most effective long-term goal.